Security will walk you out, Vivian Calloway said, our VP of Claims Operations, closing out 24 years of licensed judgment over $1 billion book of business with one line typed into a tablet. Rain hit the boardroom glass hard. Buffalo Bayou ran high and brown 3 floors below, off Allen Parkway, downtown Houston, Texas. Nobody else at the table said anything. My name is Nolan Hargrove, 56 years old, 24 years as senior property claims examiner. The last 11 of them, the one signature nobody else on the flood book bothered to double-check. A different number sat behind my own eyes while she talked. $314,000, the balance still owed on my son's treatment, due in 6 weeks whether I had a job or not. Neither number moved. I set both hands flat on the table and left them there. Effective today, she said, tapping the dashboard open again, its live loss ratio graph ticking downward like something worth applauding. We're not denying care, we're right-sizing risk. I didn't answer that. I unclipped the scuffed leather holder from my belt, the one carrying my adjuster license, the plastic corner worn soft from 24 years of field inspections, and set it on the table without sliding it across. You'll want that back eventually, I said. I doubt it, she said. Just silence, and a general counsel 3 seats down who hadn't spoken since the meeting started. I stood, took the holder back off the table, and clipped it to my belt again before anyone could ask why. 24 years earlier, I'd started on a catastrophe crew after a hurricane, counting roof squares in 100-degree heat, learning to tell a real claim from a padded one by the way a homeowner's voice changed on the 3rd question, not the 1st. I still remembered the smell of wet drywall and diesel generators from that first week, the way a family stood on their own front lawn holding whatever they'd managed to carry out. Nobody trained me for a boardroom. The Bayou had trained me for patience, and patience was the only thing in the room this morning that Vivian couldn't tap open on a dashboard. There's a transition memo, Vivian said, sliding a folder my direction. HR will walk you through severance. I didn't open it. Who's the new adjuster of record on the flood book? We're centralizing that function, she said. Precision doesn't need one name attached to it anymore. It does under your own compliance policy, I said. Not mine. Yours. She swiped the tablet's screen dark and looked back up at me, already finished with the subject. That's an outlier worth optimizing, not a rule. I didn't argue. I picked up the folder, unopened, and walked toward the door, past the window where the Bayou kept moving the same way it had for 200 years, indifferent to anyone's quarterly numbers. In the elevator lobby, a claims examiner I barely knew by name stopped typing long enough to watch me pass. The way people watch something leave that they assume won't come back the same way it left. I pressed the button for the ground floor and stood facing the doors, the license holder still warm against my hip from 24 years of exactly this kind of weather, rain sliding sideways across the glass toward the Bayou below, the same water that had been rising and falling past this building since before anyone in that boardroom had a title. Nobody at that table grasped yet that my license was still the one signature their own policy couldn't survive without. The elevator doors closed on the boardroom, and I found myself thinking, of all things, about a roofline 3 weeks earlier, 40 minutes east of the office, water still standing in a stranger's backyard. Paolo Carrillo, our field claims investigator, had called me out to a homeowner's claim flagged for a second look, storm damage running 6 figures. A timeline that didn't quite sit right on paper. I didn't need the file summary. After 24 years, I could tell a manufactured claim from a real one by the way the damage argued with itself. Shingles granulated wrong for the wind speed log that week, gutters bent in a direction the recorded storm track couldn't explain. Insurance companies sent someone new. The homeowner told Paolo at the door, arms crossed, voice already braced for a fight. Guessing you're here to find a reason to say no. I'm here to look, I said. That's a different job. I walked the perimeter myself, hands in the soil at the foundation line, checking moisture depth the way I'd learned on a catastrophe crew before this homeowner was born. Paolo held the ladder while I climbed to the gutter line, and I ran 2 fingers along a bent aluminum seam, feeling for the particular crimp a fallen limb leaves that a crowbar never quite reproduces. Real, I said, climbing back down. The adjuster who flagged this owes somebody an apology. Paolo wrote it in his own notebook before I'd even opened mine, a habit I'd never asked him to keep. You always write it twice, he said. Once for the file, once for yourself. The file forgets things, I said. I don't like to. The homeowner's shoulders came down half an inch, the particular release of someone who'd braced for a denial and gotten a signature instead. I approved the claim on site, walked her through the payout timeline in plain language, no jargon, and watched her write it down like she didn't trust herself to remember it later. Back in the truck, Paolo asked the question he always asked. Why do you still climb the ladder yourself? Company'd pay for a drone survey. A drone doesn't feel the crimp, I said. It sees an angle from 300 feet up. I need to know what actually happened to that gutter, not what it looks like happened from somewhere safe and dry. That was 3 weeks ago. 3 weeks before a VP with a tablet decided precision meant never touching a ladder at all. I signed off on 11 claims that same week. All real, all paid within terms, all quietly proving a number nobody in the executive suite would ever see. The cost of getting it right the first time, every time, for 24 years running. Nobody handed out an award for that. Nobody was supposed to have to. Driving home from the termination meeting, rain still coming sideways across the windshield, I thought about that homeowner's face more than I thought about my own severance folder sitting unopened on the passenger seat. Some jobs you keep doing right long after anyone stops checking your work, not because someone's watching, but because you know exactly what happens to a family on a lawn holding everything they own when someone doesn't. Somewhere in a filing cabinet nobody in that boardroom had opened in years, a clock built into my own compliance policy was already keeping perfect time, waiting on nothing but someone deciding it was worth reading. 3 weeks before that termination meeting, I got pulled into a conference room I hadn't been invited to 20 minutes earlier. Vivian already at the whiteboard sketching a flowchart nobody had asked her to draw. This is the claims velocity model, she said, capping the marker and swiping her tablet awake to show me the live dashboard behind it. Every flood claim gets scored the moment it's filed. High confidence claims paid within 72 hours. Low confidence claims routed to a review queue. We're not denying care. We're right-sizing where the review actually happens. No examiner touches a file until the algorithm flags it. And a high-confidence score means what, exactly, on a structure built before 1978 building codes existed? It means the math says pay it, she said. Which, statistically, it usually should. I pulled out the chair across from her and sat down without being asked to. Statistically isn't the same as correctly. I had a claim 2 years back that scored high confidence on paper and turned out to be a homeowner burying a foundation crack under fresh paint before the adjuster showed up. Took me 40 minutes on site to catch it. Your 72-hour clock would have paid it out before anyone ever walked the property. One claim I remember. There are others nobody wrote down because catching them was just the job. She turned the whiteboard around so the flowchart faced the wall instead of me. A small, deliberate gesture. This isn't a referendum on your record, Nolan. It's a question about whether this company can keep functioning if you're ever out sick for a week. I haven't missed a week in 24 years. Which is exactly the risk I'm describing. A compliance associate 2 chairs down flipped through a printed copy of the model's scoring criteria, not looking up. I watched him find something, hesitate, then close the folder without asking his question out loud. You, Vivian said, catching it. Go ahead. Nothing, he said. Just checking a threshold. Say it, I said. Nobody in here bites. The confidence scoring doesn't weight regional flood zone history at all. It's the same formula whether the property's in a 100-year floodplain or 3 miles from the coast. Vivian's jaw tightened, barely. That's a calibration detail, an outlier worth optimizing. It gets refined. It's the whole job, I said. That's not a detail you refine after the fact. That's the difference between a model that works and one that just looks like it does until the first real storm season. She didn't answer that directly. She flipped the whiteboard back around and kept talking through the rollout timeline like the question had never been asked. Let me step outside this meeting for a second. This account only just started, and I notice every one of you sticking around for it. A new story here tomorrow and again the day after, for as long as you keep showing up to hear them. I sat through the rest of it without saying anything else, working through the only question that actually mattered to me, whether Vivian believed a word of what she was selling, or whether somebody upstairs had already made this decision and handed her the marker. Nobody in that room understood yet how much of an insurance company's real intelligence lives in the parts no algorithm ever gets asked to score. Vivian held the quarterly claims review that Friday, standing on the little riser by the coffee station where morning huddles usually happened, close enough to 80 claims desks that nobody on the floor needed a speaker system to hear her. "One structural change before we wrap," she said, not looking up from her tablet. "Effective today, the flood book moves off individual examiner authority and into centralized review. Mr. Hargrove's function gets absorbed into the model." 80 people watched me from their own desks, most of them not yet understanding what any of it meant. "This saves the company $1.15 million a year in redundant field examination," she said. "We're not denying care, we're right-sizing risk." "Redundant," I said, loud enough that I didn't need to raise it further. "Efficient," she said. "There's a difference, if you're willing to see it." A voice from the compliance desks cut in before Vivian could move to her next point. "Does that touch our federal flood program status at all?" "The Federal Emergency Management Agency cares about outcomes," Vivian said, "not org charts. Our write-your-own status stands on its own." She clicked forward without waiting to see if the question had a follow-up. "Who's the licensed adjuster of record on that book, starting today?" the same voice asked. "Claims Operations is finalizing that assignment." "Finalizing," I said. "Not assigned. An outlier worth optimizing, not a gap," she said, moving to close the meeting before anyone else could weigh in. I opened the folder I'd carried in, the compliance memo I drafted before dawn at my own kitchen table, and read one line aloud. Flat, no drama in it. "For the record, removing the named adjuster from a federally partnered claims line without a documented replacement plan is a finding our own internal policy requires me to log. I'm logging it, time-stamped, as of 9 this morning." A murmur moved through the nearest desks, quiet enough that only the closest few actually heard it. "Duly noted," Vivian said, closing her tablet. "By whom? In writing, by what time?" I said. "Not a general HR email 3 weeks from now. You'll have it by end of day. End of day today. Not end of the week. Not sometime soon." "Is that a threat, Nolan?" "It's a timestamp request," I said. "You're welcome to check the difference against your own scoring model, if you trust it that much." She looked at me for the first time since the meeting started. "You've made your point." "I haven't made a point," I said. "I've documented a fact. Those aren't the same category, and you of all people know it. They can look identical from certain angles. Only to someone who's never had to be right about one," I said. Nobody clapped when she wrapped the meeting. A few people at the nearest desks tapped pens against their monitors instead, the closest thing this floor had to applause for either of us. I walked back to my own desk past people who wouldn't quite meet my eyes. That would have been bad enough on its own. One man's authority quietly folded into a dashboard in front of 80 people who'd still have to work alongside whoever inherited it. But the federal flood program's own compliance review already had a date sitting on its calendar 3 weeks out, and nobody on that floor had thought yet to wonder what an unreplaced named examiner might look like to a reviewer checking whether anyone still held the authority to sign a flood claim at all. I spent Saturday morning at my own kitchen table with the license card in front of me, the severance folder pushed off to one side, unopened, coffee going cold while I read the fine print on a document I hadn't actually needed to read in 24 years. Terrence Yarnell, our general counsel, picked up on the second ring when I called his cell instead of the office line. "It's Saturday, Nolan." "I know. I need 10 minutes, and I need you to pull something up while we talk." He'd kept weekend hours for years, he'd told me once, ever since a case that taught him what a Monday morning could cost people who never saw it coming. 20 minutes later, I was standing in his kitchen doorway with the card and my compliance memo, watching him boot up his laptop at his own dining table. "Texas Registry," I said. "Pull my license number." He typed, waited, read the screen. "Active. Good standing. What am I looking at here? What's it worth if the company loses it?" He didn't reach for his phone's calculator. He wrote the math out longhand on a napkin instead, the way he apparently did everything. "Depends how you value it. Call it $481 million, if you're pricing what the flood line can't operate without." Neither of us spoke for a moment after that. "There's more behind it than the number," I said. "Background check. Continuing education, audited every 2 years. 0 disciplinary findings. Cross-certified with the federal program at every renewal. 24 years of the state and the federal government both signing off, over and over, that my name was safe to trust with somebody's house. Nobody rebuilds that by finding a warm body with a license in 3 weeks. None of that's printed on the card, he said. No, that's the part they're about to discover is missing. He set the napkin down. Company policy requires a continuously licensed examiner of record on that line, or the federal partnership itself goes under review. Section 11. I wrote it myself, 15 years back, after the case. You never mentioned you thought you'd need it again. I didn't think I would. I just never got around to deleting it. We drafted the notice together at his dining table, him reading each clause aloud before either of us touched a pen, me correcting a date once when he transposed 2 digits without noticing. 23 days from today, he said, checking it against a wall calendar behind him. That lands right at month's end. Cross-reference that against anything already on the federal side. I said, I don't want a collision nobody saw coming. He made a call, waited, came back. There's a compliance review already scheduled that same week. Unrelated, on paper. Leave the date exactly where it is. He notarized a copy for my own file before I left, his kitchen table doubling as a law office for the better part of an hour. I clipped the license holder to my belt on the walk to my car, mostly out of habit, since there was no field left that week for it to go with me to. None of it had a name yet, not officially. But something had started that Saturday morning that neither the company nor the federal reviewer, already circling the same week on their own calendar, had any idea was now running on the same clock. 12 days into the countdown, Paolo texted me a photo before he called. No caption, just a denial letter with a claim number I recognized from a house I'd inspected myself 2 years back. When he finally called, it was almost noon. You're not going to believe the number she used at the all-hands this morning, he said. 41% faster average resolution since the Velocity model went live. We're not denying care, she said. We're right-sizing risk, same as always, and the whole room clapped for it. 41% of what baseline? Nobody asked. She kept the tablet propped up on the podium the whole time, flipping between 3 different dashboard views like she was daring someone to ask a question about any of them. I was standing in the back holding a tray of bagels, technically not even supposed to be in the room. And the denial letter you sent me? That's the 41%, he said. Or part of it. I pulled 6 files this week. The model closed inside 72 hours. 2 of them shouldn't have closed at all. That same week, the centralized queue started auto-approving low-confidence flood claims on a rolling basis whenever the review backlog crossed a certain threshold. A detail buried 3 pages into an internal memo nobody outside the data team had read closely. Paolo found it by accident, cross-referencing claim timestamps against his own field notes out of habit. They're clearing the backlog by lowering the bar instead of adding reviewers, he said. This one here, flood displacement on a slab foundation, denied same day, model flagged it consistent with pre-existing wear. I drove out and looked at it myself yesterday. Waterline still on the drywall 4 feet up. Whose name is on the denial? No name. Model ID and a timestamp. Photograph the water line before anyone paints over it, I said. Get the homeowner's permission first, in writing if you can. Already did, this morning. Emailed myself a copy too, just in case anyone ever asks whether I made it up. I didn't call it in. There wasn't a version of that phone call where anyone with a title still listened to me, and pointing at a mistake I had no authority to fix felt less like helping and more like practicing a habit I couldn't afford to keep. You could still say something, Paolo said. Officially, unofficially, whatever's left. There's nothing left that comes with a title attached to it. There's a stack of denial letters that says otherwise. Keep the stack, I said. Somebody's going to need it. He laughed once low. Never thought I'd end up the one telling you to document things. Feels backward. It was always going to end up here eventually, I said. Just usually goes the other direction. A facilities request went out that Friday booking the 14th floor conference room for external visitors the following week, catering for 6, no further detail attached. It landed in my inbox by accident, an old distribution list nobody had gotten around to removing me from yet. I didn't ask who'd requested the room. Somebody already had. Vivian ended her presentation calling the quarter the strongest velocity numbers this company has ever posted. Nobody in that building could have priced what one water line, for feet up a slab foundation nobody double-checked, was about to cost before the month was out. The 23rd day started with me repainting the back fence, a job I'd been putting off for 3 years, brush in hand at 7:52 when Paolo called. Federal reviewers walked into the flood claims floor, he said. Not the usual desk audit. Full team, on-site file pull, and they're asking why the same name keeps coming up as technical contact for every state we write flood in. Every state, I said. Not just Texas. You were never just Texas, Nolan. You were the whole national book. I don't think anyone in this building ever said that plainly out loud until this morning. I kept painting. There wasn't a version of that sentence that required me to drive anywhere. Get me the timestamp on when they walked in, I said. That's the only thing I can do from here. By 8:40, the reviewers had pulled the flood claims register and found no licensed examiner on file in any of the 11 states where Interstate Keystone wrote flood policy under the federal government's own name. 2 examiners tried explaining the centralized scoring system to people who hadn't asked about a system. I still had read access to the public claims status dashboard, a courtesy nobody had thought to revoke. The pending review count climbed past 4,000 files while I watched, and I held it against the 23-day deadline in my head, doing the math before anyone official said it out loud. The deadline had already passed at midnight, in all 11 states at once. Knowing a number isn't the same as acting on it. At 10:05, Terrence called. They want to know who's still legally answerable for this program, he said. Your license number hasn't moved off that file, whatever your business card says this week. Then somebody with a current business card should answer them, I said. Nobody in claims operations has ever pulled a wet drywall sample in their life. You know that better than anyone, in every one of those 11 states. I do, I said. That's not my problem today. Officially, by 11:30, it had reached the board chat, then the wire services. Terrence read me a headline over the phone, his voice tighter than I'd heard it. Major flood insurers' federal authorization in question across 11 states, ahead of hurricane season. Do the math on what that actually costs, I said. The National Flood Book runs about $1.031 billion in exposure, spread across the same 23 days since my removal took effect. Call it $45 million a day, close to $1.9 million an hour, times every policyholder in 11 states who thinks their coverage is sitting there whether anyone signs for it or not. That's not a number. That's people. It was always people, I said. Somebody just made it easier to see today. At 12:15, one of the reviewers formally flagged the absence of a licensed examiner as a governance violation, triggering a nationwide hold on new flood policy issuance until the finding was resolved. Terrence read the notice to me word for word. Technical authority under federal hold, effective coast to coast. I set the paintbrush down across the top of the can and sat on the back step, 3 miles and 1 revoked authorization away from a claims floor I used to know by the sound of the phones, presumably ringing in 11 states at once by now. You're not going to say anything else about it? Terrence asked. It's all on paper somewhere already, I said. Today's just the day everybody else finally goes looking for it. Nobody yet understood that the federal hold notice had just made the 4 o'clock meeting mandatory for people who'd planned on being anywhere else that afternoon. The federal hold notice put everyone in that conference room by 4 o'clock sharp, 1 floor above the claims desks where Vivian had announced my removal weeks earlier. 16 people crowded around a table built for 10, the review team's own paperwork sitting in front of every chair, a phone somewhere down the hall ringing itself out unanswered. Vivian opened her tablet before she sat down. Let's be precise about what actually happened here. A scoring model performed exactly as configured, an outlier worth optimizing, not a governance failure. We're not denying anyone anything. We're right-sizing where the review happens. The model cleared a claim that needed a physical inspection first, Paolo said, half standing at Terrence's nod. I documented it in writing the same day. It's time-stamped. A field note isn't the same thing as a governance finding. It's the same thing I trained him to write, I said, word for word. Terrence set an unopened folder in front of him. Section 11 of company policy, adopted the year I joined this legal department, requires a continuously licensed examiner of record on any federally partnered claims line. That requirement doesn't lapse because it's inconvenient. It lapsed because nobody replaced Mr. Hargrove inside the 23 days the same policy allows for. Nobody's used Section 11 in 15 years, Vivian said. That should tell you something about how seriously anyone actually takes it. It tells me exactly one thing, Terrence said, that in 15 years, nobody managed to create the exact situation it was written for. Until now. Down the hall, the ringing finally stopped. I'd also point out the process here, Vivian said, angling toward the chairman. A dormant clause got activated in the middle of an active federal review, which raises its own questions about timing and motive. The motive is a family in Corpus Christi whose claim your model denied without ever sending anyone to look at their foundation, I said. You don't get to call the clause suspicious and the denial routine in the same breath. That's not a question the chairman asked, Vivian said. No, the chairman said, but it's the one I should have. Vivian's fingers stopped moving across the tablet's edge. She set it face down on the table and left it there. The hold doesn't lift until FEMA has written confirmation that a licensed examiner is back on file, Terrence said. That part isn't up for a vote. Everything else at this table is, and I'd like it settled before anyone leaves this room. This gets resolved today, not litigated, the chairman said. What do you propose, Terrence? Reinstate his authority. Full back pay from the date of removal. A permanent claims integrity committee reporting to this board, not to any one department, with Mr. Hargrove in the chair, and the scoring initiative suspended pending an independent review of every denial it's issued. Agreed, the chairman said. I'll need time to respond to that, Vivian said. You have until this meeting ends, the chairman said. She signed the settlement memo first, then the committee charter, her signature noticeably less certain than the one on file from the day she'd started. I reached down and clipped the license holder back onto my belt, more out of habit than need. There was nothing left in that room requiring me to prove whose name was still on it. The final payment on my son's treatment cleared 2 weeks after that meeting, a settlement line item that closed a balance I'd stopped watching drop because watching it hadn't made it move any faster. Back pay landed the same week, corrected retroactive to the day Vivian moved the flood book off my name, plus a separate figure Terrence's memo called compensation for the committee chairmanship. All of it together totaling $5,630,000. You could have taken a bigger settlement and walked, Terrence said, the week the charter took effect. No committee, no reason to ever set foot back on that floor. Some people would have. I didn't do this for a bigger number, I said. I built that flood book counting roof squares in 100-degree heat. I wanted the authority back, not a payout to disappear with. A one-page letter came from the federal program 3 days after the charter was signed. No letterhead flourish, just a case number and a single paragraph. Terrence read the middle line out loud without my asking him to. Technical authority of record restored, governance covenant satisfied across all 11 states. No further action pending. He set the letter down flat on my desk and didn't say anything else about it. Neither did I. It seemed like the right amount of ceremony for something that had cost this much to fix. The next quarterly claims review landed on a clear morning. No rain on the glass. Buffalo Bayou running low past Allen Parkway. Same riser by the coffee station. The interim head of claims operations reading my name off a very different list. No envelope. No punchline. Pins tapped against monitors again, longer this time, until I had to raise a hand to end it. And the claims velocity dashboard itself was formally retired that same afternoon, replaced by a review process with Paolo's name listed as field lead. Vivian didn't survive the quarter. 11 days after the charter took effect, the board voted her out as an officer outright, her uncle abstaining rather than defending the niece he'd once vouched for personally. Once legal costs and the state inquiry were weighed against the money she'd claimed to save, the compensation committee's own numbers came back owing the company, not the other way around, and there was no severance left to negotiate over. She applied for a VP opening at a competing carrier 2 states over before the month was out. The interview got canceled the same week someone on their compliance team pulled up the state inquiry, now permanently attached to her name. The wrongful denial pattern Paolo had documented traveling with her wherever she went next. Nobody at Interstate Keystone remembered to take her name off the building directory for 6 more months. It just sat there in the lobby, wrong, until someone finally noticed. Paolo got a new title around the same time, Senior Claims Integrity Investigator, along with a raise the company approved without needing another wrongful denial to force its hand. My license holder sits on the corner of my desk now instead of clipped to my belt, the plastic still cloudy at the corners, the card itself renewed but the holder unchanged. I never replaced it. Some things earn the wear they carry. My son took his first day back at school 2 weeks after that final payment cleared, ordinary in every way that mattered, needing nobody's explanation for where the money had come from. I didn't offer one. He didn't ask. He just wanted to know if I'd be at the door when the bus came back, same as always, and I was. 11 states of policyholders spent 23 days trusting a signature they never saw, never questioned, never thought to check was still attached to a real person. Most of them still don't know how close that trust came to meaning nothing. I do. A country's worth of families found out, without ever knowing they'd been asked the question, exactly whose hands their coverage was sitting in the whole time, and it happened to be mine.